Many business owners dream about the day they sell their business, but the day after closing can be a shock if you are not prepared. My guest today has experienced it and he's willing to share what nobody had told him before. Welcome to Business Beyond You, the one-stop hub for insights, conversations, and perspectives business owners need to build businesses that last beyond them. I'm Sara Vaziri. I'm an A advisor in the state of California, and my guest today is Jonathan Sherrill. He used to have a manufacturing business which he sold successfully, and based on what he says, the day after closing, he had a shock. But the good news is that he's here and willing to share that experience with us. Jonathan, welcome to Business Beyond You. It would be great if you can give us a background about yourself, your business, until the day that you close, and then we will get there.
Thank you, Sarah. It's great to be here and thanks for having me on. Yeah, so I was raised up in a family that was entrepreneurial, and my dad started a business, a manufacturing business, when I was about 14 years old. And so I would work with him after school. I would finish my studies and go in and work in the shop and all different levels of the business, from sweeping floors to loading trucks. And eventually I grew into sales and sales management, then general management. And after a period of several years, my dad decided he wanted to sell that business.
Mhm.
So that was around 2010. And I helped him kind of run point on the seller side. And so all the due diligence and all the negotiations and things of that nature that go into a sale. And I really enjoyed that actually. It was something that I had not had much experience with before. And so I learned a ton just going through that process and helping him get a successful exit. After that, I ended up working for the company that bought that business from him. I was installed as the president and really learned a lot about kind of the Main Street, the Wall Street almost way of doing business, right? Kind of what they're looking at more so than just a entrepreneur and the way kind of we do things. And some of those differences are just things like financial management and reporting and leadership and things of that nature. So when I started running the business for the private equity firm that bought us, I, with their help, set up leadership teams and functional heads and like that. And then we set up processes and systems that were previously not documented and organized. And then we grew the business significantly. We went from one location to five over a 6-year period. And in 2017, I had approached the owner of the private equity company about becoming a partner in that business. I didn't have any equity in it, and I was thinking longer term, taking care of my family. And at first, he's like, "No, that's not an option right now, but maybe later." And so I waited later, a few months, and I reached out again, and he said, "No, that we are not set up for that, and we're not doing that." And I didn't push back. I just continued about my job. And a couple months later, he asked to have a meeting with me. And kind of an unexpected meeting. He flew down from New York, and we were in the conference room waiting to kind of go over things to do with the business. And he asked to see me in my office. And so went to my office, and he said, "It's clear to me that you want to be an entrepreneur, and there's no option for that here." And with that, he let me go right on the spot. And it was, they were decent, nice. It wasn't ugly or anything like that, but it was very real and final and gave me a little bit of time to gather up my things. And I was asked to leave out the side door of my office, didn't go through the main office to say goodbye to anyone that I had hired for those past 25 years. I had been there for 25 years. But, it was really a blessing. And at the time, it was difficult, but it was really a door opener, kind of forced me to, if you want to be an entrepreneur, go do it now. And so with all the experience I had had and knowledge of kind of what investors are looking for and things like that. It wasn't a straight path to this, but we don't have the time on the podcast to go into all the details. But long story shorter, I started a metal building manufacturing business.
Mhm.
I moved from my home in Florida and took my family, my wife and daughter, and we moved to Georgia and started a manufacturing business. My dad was my financial backer, and uh, we had some really good success. It took a while to we didn't have any employees or anything to start with, so we had to meet local people and kind of network and build out the customer base. That was during the COVID years, shortly after. And so those things worked out in our favor. But the main thing we want to talk about is kind of the exit from that business. So 3.5 years in, I kind of had a realization moment that now's the time to sell the business. And that story is all in my book, and it's a story for another day. But I started that process, got with a good sell side advisor, which I highly recommend that people do. Don't go it alone. Got to get somebody that's good, someone like Sara that can really walk you through this, because it's full of twists and turns. But with the right advisor, it doesn't have to be a super difficult situation. There is a way forward, right? And so I was very blessed I had a coach that connected me with a good sell side advisor. And with my experience in exiting previously, with helping my dad with it, and then running the company for the private equity, I had built this manufacturing business to sell from the beginning. Now, when I started it, I thought it would be maybe 10 or 15 years before I sold. Little did I know it would be 3.5 years. That process took 12 months. They don't all take 12 months, but mine did. I think typically is probably nine average, but mine was a full 12 months. And during that time, the business continued growing. The market kept getting better, and I was able to sell at the peak, but got a lot more for it than I had planned, actually more than double from the number that we started off with. In a year, it doubled just as a result of continuous growth and getting a good advisor that set up a competitive auction. And
And that experience you had to build something that's sellable because of
absolutely,
working with that equity firm for years.
that's right. Yes, and a sellable business that doesn't isn't solely focused on me as the founder and kind of my DNA all in that business. And that was part of the thing I learned at the working for private equity is it can't all depend on one person. The leader can't be the chief cook and bottle washer. And so that's where we set up these functional heads and people and processes so that, you're taking care of strategy and vision and big things, but the day-to-day of the business isn't dependent on you, the leader, me, the leader. So
Mhm.
kind of the vacation test, can I take a 2-month vacation? And what would happen? And that's a worthwhile exercise to do, ask yourself, what would really happen? And then work on those things. Because if you can get your business where it's running without you there every day, without you there a few weeks at a time, you have a whole lot closer to a sellable business than one that relies on you to be there every week, right?
Exactly.
And there's ways to get that established. If you're not there, it doesn't mean it can be done. It just takes working on those things and being very methodical with it. I had worked since I was 14 and I was 39 at the time in 2022. And when we closed in July, first of all, I kind of established my must-haves and what I would like to have out of the deal ahead of time. And
Mhm.
that's what your sell side advisor will do with you, right? Is help you establish those things. I'm sure you do that with your clients. So what do you want out of this deal? Would you like to have, and what is a must have? And when the deal closed, all of my must haves was done, checked off, as well as my like to haves. And one of the must haves was I'm not going to stay with the business. My reasons for selling was more personal and family. So it kind of defeated the purpose if I stayed on board and ran the business for the new owners. So those boxes were checked, and which made it a very clean cut deal. And so the day after closing, it felt it didn't really have this massive impact on me the next day, right? It was more like if you go on vacation for a week and your phone's not ringing and your emails aren't coming through because people know you're gone, that's kind of expected. But I think it's like a month later, 2 months later, and you realize I'm not needed anymore. I am no longer making any decisions. Nobody's dependent on me at the business level, and I'm not required for anything other than, my family and my immediate surroundings. But as far as business goes, the industry's moving on without me, and the people that relied on me, the families, the of the employees, all these people, they're taken care of, but they're working for somebody else. And you are a memory that's fading fast. And that's, it's bittersweet. It's great to know that you left the business in good hands, had a good acquirer, someone that bought your business. But what it does to you personally is, I'm sure it varies from person to person, but for me, it was a bit of an anxiousness, I would say. I spent a lot of time, you know, with my family, but you're not sitting around with the family in the living room 12 hours a day, So I had a lot of time to kind of process and work through this. And I had been kind of advised, warned, you might say, by friends that had sold their businesses that said, you need to give it at least a year before you jump right into something else. And it's interesting because I thought, oh, that won't be a problem. I would just be so glad to finally have sold it and get what I wanted. And but you'd be surprised how you start justifying, like, maybe I could go buy this little business and run it kind of hands off. It's amazing the mind will play those games with you. It did with me and others that I know. But thankfully, I didn't jump right into that because I have friends who did, who sold and immediately went and invested in other people's businesses and startups, and they are working harder and more stressed out and have tighter money problems than they did when they owned their main bread and butter business before they sold it. So that's something to, I think, was great advice. Um, and really just working through that and learning to be okay, being quiet, being still. It's a whole area of life that have been working on, and to this day. And it's not that I recommend this either, to sit still and do nothing, but trying to fill the gap and fill that void of identity and purpose immediately. You built your career over possibly decades, and to think you can go fill that void suddenly in a matter of a month or two, it isn't healthy, first of all. But I have come to appreciate the time and the quiet time, and it's helped me to get real clear, sort of waiting for that clarity before I make decisions and moves. And it's a luxury, honestly. In business, sometimes you don't have the luxury of time and deliberation that you would like to have. But once I sold, I can process things a lot longer, take longer, and really get clear on what my motivations are for even wanting to go down these paths. And I think it's a soul searching experience, but it's been great. I highly recommend it. But I think it's worth a heads up to say, and some people might be afraid of that, but and we've talked a little bit about this, but that's part of what I do with people is kind of work through that fear of life after the sale and identity and purpose and even community, because your community oftentimes kind of moves on without you, like we said. Um, but yeah, that's
But I
that's
think that I have seen a lot of entrepreneurs, they enjoy working so much
mhm,
that they don't know what to do after that. So
yeah,
my dad is one of those people, and he uses his work to escape going with the family somewhere when he doesn't like to do that. And I always tell
absolutely.
him one of the reasons you don't want to sell your business is that then you don't have that reason to escape from the things you don't like.
That's, I can see that. I always had in the last few years prior to selling, I always had a bit of a drive to work. So I would have 45 minutes from where I live to where I work. And that's an hour and a half in the truck every day, commuting. It was an easy commute, interstate and easy traffic. And I come to have routine with that. My devotional, my quiet time, my planning time for the business, all that was sort of on autopilot 5 days a week. That was this set aside time, right? My routine, and then my routine through the day of maybe I like a certain coffee shop, so I would split off at around 2 o'clock and go get my favorite coffee or whatever. And those things become, in spite of all the kind of the stress of the business and the working on it, you have these little things you may not even realize, and all of a sudden you have no reason and no routine. So now you have to kind of dig deep to create this. And I think knowing that ahead of time can really soften the blow and kind of prepare and be like, what would I be doing on Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. after the sale of the business, you know? And normally you would be deep in meetings or in your work. And so just planning that ahead of time can really help take the edge off because the post exit is wonderful. You've likely got, generational wealth and options and time um but there can be a downside to it if you're not prepared. And that's what we're talking about today is kind of that preparation ahead of time
Mhm.
and a little bit of what to expect. And I don't know that there's really a way to fast track the identity process of processing that. But having some clarity ahead of time can definitely help with that.
So you suggest owners start thinking about that step before going through the process. If you go back, what would you do to prepare yourself to avoid that shock and that situation?
I think just, I don't know that there's a ton to prepare for, I think, other than knowing about it. And then, some people are going to have different situations. For me, I still have a young child at home. She's 16 now, but that was, 3.5 years ago, or yeah. And so, she was uh, 12, 13 years old. So, very busy school routine and things. And I was able to throw myself into that and which was a lot of my why actually for selling. So I was able to spend a lot more time with her and do things. But, others may not have that. Maybe it's an empty nest and they want to golf. Well, you can only golf so much, and then you start to get stir crazy with that. But I think just knowing and kind of imagining yourself on, what would what would be fulfilling to me and kind of maybe even getting some of that stuff lined up ahead of time, that,
Mhm.
and not necessarily, and I think it's important not to feel like we have to fill all those voids with something equally uh, purposeful or, it's a different season of life. And it can be okay to learn to be a little quieter and a little more still. That could be some good personal work that can make you a better person in the process. And I know this is a business podcast, but we're dealing with real people, and real emotions and real psychology here.
Yeah. So tell me about your book. You have written a book, The Extraordinary Exit. What does it talk about? You co-authored it, if I'm not wrong,
I
with
did
Andy.
with Andy. Yeah, Andy's my sell side advisor,
Mhm.
and we basically what the extraordinary exit covers is, I like to say, what to expect when you're selling your business. And it really covers my selling of my business quick and steel from the early preparation. It covers a little bit of the early days of the actual business, kind of, but we really dig into once I decided to sell the business. And every significant step along that process is in the book.
Mhm.
Every milestone, every preparation, in the back of the book, we actually have a bit of a map that shows. I guess you would call it a Gantt chart, but I don't know if you can see it here. But let's see if I can show you. But it's going to show you sort of the steps. So month one, hired an M&A coach, right? And it shows how long each of those steps took. Well, that's 12 months. The sell side advisor was month one. All right. And
So you have detailed the experience that you
yeah,
have yourself. That's great.
strategic finance and all that. So we really go into, but this is just a short summary breakdown in the back, but it goes through all of that from both perspectives. So it goes from my perspective as a entrepreneur, and a lot of the stuff we've already talked about, even,
Mhm.
the emotional journey, the ups and downs of that process that took 12 months, because that's a whole different field, right? And I kind of walk through the challenges and the business and the struggle of selling the business and running the business and growing the business at the same time, and kind of how we handled that successfully. And but Andy's coming at it from sort of that sell side advisor side, and he's wrapping in more than just my story. He's other examples as well. So
Mhm.
um, it's the book that I would like to have read if I was running a business and thinking about selling it and had never sold a business before. It really gives you a peek behind the curtain. A lot of people talk about M&A and they're using terminology and things that us entrepreneurs aren't familiar with. We're familiar with our industry, but this gives a everyday entrepreneur an easy to read, easy to understand
Roadmap.
peek behind that
So,
curtain.
because we are going out of time, I want you to also tell us about the Waypoint, the company you have started. What are your plans to do there to help the business owners?
Thank you. Yeah, Waypoint is a business I started because there wasn't one. Once I sold my business, I realized there just isn't any community out there for people post-exit. And I also realized there's very little out there for kind of pre-exit for entrepreneurs who are thinking about this. There's advisors and M&A advisors, there's CPAs, there's attorneys, and all of them fill a very critical role. You can't do it without. But I have created a community called Waypoint that brings entrepreneurs together, business owners together at any stage of that process. Whether you're a couple years away, you're just thinking about it, you've just done started the process, or maybe you're even post exit. And we come together on a monthly basis and not in person. It's too difficult to meet up in person, but we do it through a Zoom call. It's very confidential and it really walks people through those emotional journey, the purpose, and the fulfillment that all the things that we're looking for in a proper exit sale. And it kind of lets people talk about it from peer to peer as well. I facilitate it,
Mhm.
but it really opens the room up for others to share their stories and their progress along the way, and it creates a community that continues on even after your exit, as much as you want to be involved post-exit as well, because other networks, like I was a member of YPO, and when I went to renew after I sold my business, I couldn't renew. I didn't have a company anymore. They give you a couple years of grace, and after that, you're kind of out. At least at my age, I think there's an age where you kind of get locked in, grandfathered in, but not for me. And so, like when I really needed the YPO, went through a major life change, it wasn't there for me. And they're great at what they do, but I'm creating this group that kind of fills that gap, and it's very beneficial for people who are looking to sell or going through that sell process. We are not M&A advisors. We love to work with people like Sarah and work hand in hand with that, but we're filling a void here that just isn't available out there in the marketplace.
Yes, I totally agree with you. I always tell my colleagues that I wish business owners had somebody to talk about what they had in mind, because they
Mhm.
start thinking about how hard would be to sell their business for a couple of years, but they don't know who to talk to. So the community you are bringing together would be a place that they can discuss it without being worried about anybody knows about it, what do they think, or all of these things that goes on their head. But we are going on running out of time. I would really, really like to appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming here and sharing your story. And thank you about thinking about the solution for people who have to go through that route.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I appreciate you having me on.
Sure.
Enjoyed
Have a
it.
great day.
You
Bye.
too. Goodbye.